Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Beanbag Archives. Today we have a very special guest. She's a FLAME alum, Anahita Sachdev. Um, so before we really begin talking about whatever it is that we're going to talk about today, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself? I mean, where you're coming from and what you did at FLAME and all that?
Sure. Thank you for having me, you guys. And my name is Anahita. I graduated from FLAME in 2018, and I studied literary and cultural studies as my major and film and television as my minor. And since then, I've been experimenting with different kinds of media. So I worked with an archive documenting oral histories for a bit, and then I freelanced for a bit, in which like it was ghostwriting, some scripting minor thingies, and then I finally landed a job that I love, which is combining culture analysis with media. And so I work with short form content, some editing, some presentation for a digital magazine. So that's where I'm at right now, and yeah, excited to start our conversation today.
LCS and film. That's like a double heart.
Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah. Um, anyway, yeah, today what we're talking about and what you told me earlier in the brief was that we we want to explore how single screen cinemas have been in the country and what's been happening to them and with them after the lockdown as well. So, initially I didn't really know much about it. I haven't really read much about single screen theaters and stuff. I mean, I've visited a few myself, not a few actually. I've seen some from the outside, but I've watched films only in one. But I can say without a doubt that it's a completely different experience altogether, going to a multiplex and going to a single screen theater. So for starters, how would how do we begin thinking about the say the cultural role of a single screen theater in India as opposed to multiplex cinema? I mean, what would you say?
Well, I think that's a very important thing to reflect on. That's really a good note to begin at. Let's see. I worked on a documentary in my final year at Flame about a single screen theater in Pune. It was called Vasant Talkies. And for that, I did a lot of research about other documentaries about single screen theaters. And most of them were from big cities. So these are cities in, say, Maharashtra, actually, a lot from, say, Nagpur, Mumbai, Pune. And their history goes back to sometimes more than a century ago, in which they would have live
Yeah,
performances of theater, and they would have famous personalities come and watch films there, and say a Gandhi would come, or a wow, I don't know any other famous personality, but they would basically would name
I'm
performers.
sure even a lot of actors and directors and stuff went there
Of
as well.
course.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
true. So they've seen the beginning of India's film industry. They've seen the transformations that went with it. They've seen the craze of when film was newly introduced in India, or when there was no sound in film, and how that became a thing. Then how color came into cinema. So these other theaters have been around for that long. So culturally, I mean, I think they're an important part of history of performance and viewership in India. I don't know what did you think when you like watched all?
Yeah, yeah, and especially in the documentaries that you sent me, the three, four of them, it's really cool how a lot of them are still called something talkies. Like they're still, I mean, they saw the birth of cinema and they've seen the evolution and things. And a lot of them, it's not just a screen, like it's a performance stage. There's a stage itself, and above the stage there's a screen. So I think they're a lot more than just the cinematic medium. I think these single screen theaters come with a lot more um I don't know, a lot more culture than just multiplex because you're in different rooms and you're sort of isolated, maybe. And I saw in one of the films, they also said that the average occupancy of a multiplex is about 17, 18%. But in a single screen theater, it's like 60, 65%, which is great. So evidently, they do have some importance, and I don't think that importance can be understated, right? Uh, However, what is most significant, I think, with the single screen theater is, at least now, is how they're managing to just survive, if not thrive, even in the age of these multiplexes and malls and things like that. and a lot of them do seem to be struggling, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's what a layperson would guess as well, because there's so much competition from these corporations which can show you films. But at the end of the day, what are we talking about? We're talking about a viewing culture in which people don't want to watch something alone. They want to watch it in a group. They want to watch it with
Yeah.
other people, something you won't just do at home. So you're going for that feel, you're going for that atmosphere, and you're going for good sound and video quality, or at least decent, like you feel like you're in that space. So if we talk about just that, definitely there are lots of spaces that offer that, but the difference between, say, single screens or cinemas that have existed for that long versus these chains is so much about the how the space feels, and how much you pay for that experience. Can you afford going to a multiplex and spending $500 for one viewing thing? I am hesitant to buy popcorn there because I know it's like worth 10 rupees, and I'm paying like $300 for it over there. Because so I feel like those are the things that I guess the question in my head about this is, do they take away from the focus on the film, and do they commercialize the whole thing in another direction? And so these are the questions I feel we need to answer before we can talk about, um, how the single screen can survive.
Yeah.
Like, what are we trying to bring back to the single screen? Or not just back, you're saying that some of them have higher occupancy rates than multiplexes, so that's a really, really interesting figure. But we do know that they're struggling to survive. So are we trying to say that they should become more posh spaces like the multiplexes, or are we trying to say that multiplexes should become more affordable? What kind of audiences are we cutting out of
Yeah.
film viewing experience? I know I'm throwing a lot of questions out there, but I think it's important to think around these, before we can answer. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But I just can't shake the feeling that the high occupancy is also because of the affordability. I'm sure that's one of the biggest um, plus points. I mean, also the fact that there's a lot of non-mainstream cinema. I think there was one single screen theater that you showed me, which screens only Marathi films, and they screen every single Marathi film that comes out. I mean, thinking of that, just I just took a step back, and if you think of that, it's such a good initiative, but it's also quite sad in the bigger picture, because it's like they're doing something that's, I mean, so important, I guess, in terms of diversity and everything. But it's just sad that it doesn't get translated to a mainstream audience who prefer going to, say, multiplex. I mean, when I say mainstream audience, I mean people who can afford it, obviously, um, who end up going to multiplexes in this age, right? And it's not just about what um, I guess what films they screen, or uh, what crowd they attract. It's also the fact that a lot of these single screen theaters are logistically and legally limited by the government policies and whatnot. For example, in Bangalore, there was a law that stated, again from one of the documentaries, if you have a space that's less than 10,000 square feet, you can't have multiplex. So you either have a single screen theater or you just wrap up entirely, which is obviously not sustainable either in the long run. And to answer some of those questions of what we want to preserve or what we want to bring to the cinema, I think it's the experience, right? It's not just, you're not just going for the film. Like you said, you're going to watch a movie with other people. And the experience of, well, I guess my point is, even while watching the film with other people, you're not just doing that. You're sitting in this big room. Maybe in India, there's a culture of intermissions as well. So during the intermission, you're probably going out, having a snack. All of that stuff comes with the film viewing experience, which is vastly different in a single screen theater, where it's a lot more community oriented, I think, and in a multiplex, which is, I guess, more posh, and it's more isolating in that way. Even after the fact that there are so many screens, it's just very pocketed and very everybody's in their individual bubbles. Uh, and the fact that it's just 70 and 80% occupancy doesn't help at all. So the thing I think we're trying to preserve is the culture of viewing films as a community. And I do understand that some of that might be, I wouldn't say stripped, but some of that might be changing with the coming of multi-screen theaters and OTTs, not to mention. Uh, so, so I'm just, it's a very difficult question to answer how we can preserve that culture as a whole.
Definitely. I think it's a very difficult question to answer. That's why, like, producers and distributors and film goers all over the country are grappling with it, thinking about it. Another policy, when you mentioned policy issues in Bangalore, that was an interesting one. There are others in which, say, the theater I visited, people will say that we don't have parking, a basic thing like
Oh yeah.
which when they started say in 1900s they wouldn't need parking, right? Or it's
Yeah.
you'd have like scooter parking and you'd be
Yeah.
like, okay, we're sorted. And now real estate is a huge deal, and so like you said, a square meterage, or like the facilities that you people expect out of any cosmopolitan center, they'll be like, mall mein to parking hona hi chahiye, to film mein bhi parking hona hi chahiye. Like, these are conveniences now that you need to offer, which you may not have been prepared for. And there's an interesting fact that I read also about how, say, when multiplexes were starting out, for the first 5 years, they were getting subsidies and tax rebates. And do we do that with single screens anymore? And is it time that we focused on that, to help those things, those places survive? And yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying about the atmosphere of film watching. And this is taking me back to the theater I used to visit. And in all honesty, I'd never gone to it before we started making the documentary. So that itself is a statement to say, where are we watching films, but what are the interesting places other than that? Anyway, so we went there, and the physical space of being there, it's an open balcony, for instance. There'll be a cat roaming around somewhere, and it's a space you don't expect where you'd watch a film, because you're just not used to that. Now, if I go to a PVR or an INOX, there's no INOX in my city, but if you go to a PVR or a, what is that, big cinemas, I mean, inside they're all the same, right? And
Yeah.
they're all supposed to be equally posh, and it's one of the poshest washrooms I've been to, the PVR in my city. I'm just like,
Yeah.
what's happening, and what are we focusing on here? And what about around you? I mean, you must be seeing like the same thing.
Yeah. I think that's the case everywhere, right? It's um the thing with multiplexes is, again, you're paying for the experience, but it's a different kind of experience. I mean, by you're paying 40 rupees, say, to watch a film and with a bunch of people and have a snack, and it's a great, I mean, the energy in that room is is insane. But then you go to a multiplex where you think it's going to be a better filming experience, where it's quiet and there's a lot of, the audio is definitely better. There's better washrooms. But am I really going there for that, or am I going there to enjoy a film with people who enjoy the film as well? And like you said, PVR, big, I think here it's Fun Cinemas or something. Whatever, any sort of high budget film viewing experience is not, it's taking away from the cinematic experience, I think. To be honest, it's not only about the film, it's about what you can do. And that's what kind of bugs me. It's not about what you actually do, it's about what's available to you to do other than watch the film. I mean, if I can, how much I'm paying for the ticket depends on how many different kinds of bathrooms I can use, rather than what film I'm watching. So it's just really absurd,
I
the
totally
whole
agree.
situation. Yeah.
And it's crazy. One of our editing professors, when we were at Flame, he said that there is a cinema that's supposed to be some full frame, double projector, some fancy thing going on. And it was the only thing in Pune which was like that. Okay. And he said, I went to watch a movie there because it was some great film, and maybe some American one. I don't recall anymore. And he said, I was the only one in the audience who noticed that they were supposed to be using two projectors. The cinema is that big. That's what they promised, right? They used one, and nobody can even tell like what's happening. You paid some premium price for some quality you think you will get, and you don't really get it, but you don't even know. So it's, I think those are part of the absurdities. Like, it's what we expect, and now we've started associating those things with the film viewing culture. But like you said, are they taking away from the experience? And I would say in some way they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be too quick to say that. I mean, they are taking away in some ways, but I think even single screen cinemas do take away in some ways and not others. So I wouldn't put one over the other and prefer one over the other, um, because I think both have some qualities that need to be taken into account. For example, I wouldn't go to a single screen cinema if I wanted to watch a film that requires like rapt attention and something really serious, because it's not an atmosphere that is generally associated with silence or a more focused film viewing. It's more in along the lines of entertainment. And even a lot of the articles that you sent me and the documentaries that I watched, cinema is seen as a form of entertainment and not something that requires much focused attention. However, in a more uh, repeatedly I'm using the word posh, but let's go with this. So in a more posh theater, it is a lot more quiet, so it lends itself to more focused viewing. So I think we require a good blend of the two, but I'm just worried whether that won't just become more homogenous, and if we bring everything into one and just make it uh, blend into each other, then homogeneity is gonna become the norm. I mean, it's already becoming the norm. It's gonna be solidified even more. So one of the biggest questions I had, and which I even asked you yesterday, what you think of is whether these cultures are worth preserving for their own sake, or whether there there is some value in just sort of clubbing them together and making the best of both worlds.
Um, I think that's a very interesting question. And before I get to that, actually, I will answer that through your previous point about, say, the film viewing experience of how silent it is versus how chaotic it is. Or maybe I'm answering this through the lens of like Bollywood, which we know we don't really hold it to a very high standard, but that's what makes cinemas in India go. I mean, function, right? So
Yeah.
I think that the atmosphere that a Bollywood film would create is supposed to be over the top. They do want you to feel like dancing when they play that dance number, or they do want you to. I mean, I don't know about whistling anymore. When I went to see Chak De India, for instance, that happened to be in a single screen, and people were whistling when the
Yeah,
uh,
definitely. I mean, I watched, sorry to interrupt you, but I watched that really old, I forgot the name. It's that really old Rajnikant movie. Um,
okay, yeah,
the
I
Yeah,
read
it
it.
was some old one, and you know how big
Okay,
Rajnikant
okay.
is in India, and I
Yeah,
watched it in Bangalore. So I mean, it's a crazy environment.
yeah. So you
Yeah,
can't not, right? Like that was so
yeah.
special. Or like those Chak De India memories were special for me, and so some of that is really cool, I think. But definitely, if you're talking about more art house, more like indie cinema, or supposedly, yeah, same art house, or a low budget, or more film festival circuit type cinema, then your behavior would be different. Your how you view it would be totally different. So like at the end of my work day, if I know I'm fried and I just want to watch a film but I don't want to focus too much, I will put on like a trashy ish film, and I'll just be like, I want to crack jokes throughout this. Or if I sit with my friends, it'll be a different experience, versus when you're totally invested, it'll be a different experience. So I think that's a very interesting point. And Bollywood raises those questions to say, Salman Khan starrer will run better in all kinds of single screens, and say and Ajay Devgan stars who bring in those kind of populations which go after that star power, that over the top feel of a film. So I don't love those films. I'm just saying that that's an interesting part of the culture. So I think it should be definitely retained, right? I think you're suggesting too, that there are special things in both of these viewing experiences. So I'm not sure logistically how that could be done. But I guess what we see is that there are certain these old cultures which are in need of help, which are in need of, say, a community participation. They're in help of, say, new forms of marketing. They need some tax subsidies. They need, I think, different support in these ways, so that they can pick themselves back up again. And I was reading an article before this about different single screen theaters in different parts of the country. So some of them are that small that it's just a mini hall in some town, and in Kerala, if I'm not mistaken, where somebody's just set up some plastic chairs, and they say, okay, we don't care about the quality of the chairs, but we get a particular sound and audio and video check. that's what we are particular about. We don't have those posh chairs, and it's a hit within their community. And so do places like that need some help? And do we need to look around us and be like, this is where I used to spend my time as a child? Like, I was just looking up the cinema I used to go to where I grew up. It was next to our house, and I don't think it exists anymore. So I don't even know, basically. So I'm curious about that, and I'm wondering whether, as a community, we can do something to help it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, funnily enough, I don't relate to that at all, because I'm probably like, I don't know, like half a decade younger than you are. And I grew up going to multiplexes. I haven't been to a single screen cinema alone. I mean, I've been to that one film with my parents. Uh, but other than that, I've been mostly to these multi-screen theaters. And the thing is, I find that gradually I've noticed this change with my own eyes. Is that gradually, excuse me, when there's an action film playing, like even in okay, so to ground this, let me preface it with something else that I found. It's that, like a Hollywood film, when you have a big budget, sorry, but like a Bollywood film, when you have a big budget, somber sort of Christopher Nolan type, say Arrival type Hollywood film, people are quiet. It's a dead silent hall. But then when you have something like an Avengers or a Godzilla or something, people go crazy. There's actual like cheering and screaming and hooting and things like that. So I don't know if it's just the language or even the genre of the film that contributes to, like, say, a single screen theater culture transposing itself into a multiplex. But secondly, coming to the second point about these little halls that require attention, I think they do, because a sinister fact is that the more a hall operates, or the more something gets used, the more subsidies it gets. For example, that's also a big thing about water in Bangalore. The more you use water, the more tax subsidy you get for using water. So people who have access to water pay less, and people who don't have access pay more, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. So small cinemas and small single screen theaters have a bigger crowd coming to them for, I would even argue, more successful films relatively in context, because they have higher viewership maybe. But they also pay more, like, to the government. So I think what we need is a division between two, like, kinds of film viewing experiences: one single screen and one, say, multiplex. But I don't know if that I mean, I feel like that's a good solution superficially, but obviously there's going to be so many more nuances and things. Like, how do we prevent uh, people just, how do we prevent losses of funds? I mean, people who are going there can't really afford to pay a lot of money. So again, these single screen theaters, even if they get subsidies, they're not going to be able to provide such a comfortable experience as other places. So how do they retain an audience in such a situation?
I
I mean,
think,
that's just one thought that I've been having.
right. I think that it's not even about, I mean, retaining the audience. There are enough film lovers in the country. And I think that then it need not be that it's the same audience that is leaving a single screen and going to a multiplex. It is that, what are the forces working against a multiplex in general, financially, logistically, I think. So if movies are bound to be a success, there are shows that go houseful, right? But it would happen
Yeah.
fewer and fewer now. But definitely, I think there are enough film lovers and film goers in India. But I think if we don't pay attention to, say, helping the quality stay up or helping the logistics stay up, it gets more and more dilapidated. It gets more and more out of date. It gets
Yeah.
more and more loss making. So I think those are the places where we need to focus, because I don't think we're losing out on audiences. But then again, I think that this disclaimer applies for the whole conversation, that we are talking from outside of the conversation. We're looking outside in. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
there. Like, if you being part of that space, then your perspective matters more. And here we are taking, like,
Probably a very anti-LCS thing to do.
yes, definitely, yeah. So that's a disclaimer I think that we should keep applying to this, yeah, to this point. But definitely something to think about. I guess we should even take into account now, like how whether OTT platforms are taking away from cinemas in general. So single screen kya, even multiplexes,
Yeah.
are we shifting away from going to a community space and watching those films? What is your like a first hand, what do you think is your first impression of that?
You know, I would have said that. See, I did go to a lot of films frequently before COVID, but unfortunately, I would have said that they're thriving before COVID, but now I don't know anymore because especially after COVID, we've seen a lot of films release not at not in theaters, but directly on streaming services. So and people are getting bigger TVs, higher clarity TVs at home. There's like the Amazon Fire Stick and things like that. There's increasing number of films available on OTTs. So I don't know if film theaters will really survive beyond another, say, half a century or say 20, 30 years, because I mean, without, say, an overhaul of the entire system or something to bring people back to that communal film viewing experience, even after a pandemic such as this. So, on first impression, I think it's bleak. Unfortunately, it's pretty bleak right now. And even I found myself. I mean, I've had friends who've invited me over to go watch Tenet or something, but I said no. I mean, it's a pretty scary situation after all. So I don't know if cinemas and especially single screen theaters where the hygiene, there have been complaints about hygiene and safety and things like that. So I don't know if they can survive beyond the COVID age.
Yeah, I mean, all the reflections I had had about this or the cinema I had visited was pre-COVID. So now, like, it's all turned up on its head, and it's so interesting that you brought up Tenet because that's what I was reading up on also before this, where it was a huge debate whether they will release the film online or whether they wouldn't, right? And I think they had a theatrical release in the US or wherever, and it didn't make as much money as they wanted, and now they're selling it differently and separately. But most other films who have that big budgets, they've said, "Nay, we'll wait and we'll release it properly later." So just the interesting question of they themselves don't want to put their films in a certain viewing platform. I found that debate very interesting to say whose choice is it? Like an audience is being like, no, no, we deserve to see it. Please just show it to us now. Like put it online. Why aren't you? And I knew a bunch
Yeah,
of people who were furious with Christopher Nolan, and I'm like, "Tumhara wo kya lagta hai? Like, why should he listen to you?" After a point, it's a business. It's a something he wants to make money on, and he's probably invested in a obviously how you would watch the film, what kind of atmosphere.
exactly. Yeah.
So you didn't end up watching it, is that it?
No, I haven't watched it yet, unfortunately. And I feel like a lot of filmmakers also really place a lot of value in how you watch a film. Like I've known people like Steven Spielberg to just outright denounce OTTs and say that you cannot watch a film on your phone or a laptop or whatever. And I have friends who also believe that, like it must be watched on a large screen. And there is definitely value to watching things on a large screen. And I personally do believe that it's better than watching it on a smaller screen. And consequently, I see why they might have delayed the release and things like that. But I don't know if I'm still conflicted on what you said about people, say, uh, speaking back or rather demanding that the film be released sooner on streaming services, because I I wonder if people would still pay to go watch it on the big screen, even if they've already seen it on a smaller screen. I know I would, but then again, I can you people like you and I can afford it, but I'm just wondering if people would still do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it depends on how big a fan you are. Like, I don't think I would. Like, I would be like, I've seen it. I'm very much. I feel like now I'm out of that space of thinking of, wow, what did this filmmaker make? Should I go and see in that atmosphere? I guess it's been so long. Maybe I started thinking differently. So that's a very interesting question of how many people would go again to pay for that experience. I was being
Yeah,
reminded of one more thing when you were just talking, but it's escaping me now.
because I know. Yeah, sorry. Before you go on, I know people who've gone to the theater 3, 4 times for the same film as well.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Oh yeah. So another thing, I saw a discussion between Vikram Aditya Motwani and um, Anurag Kashyap, and maybe it was an interview when they were releasing Sacred Games. I'm not sure. It was some interview somewhere, and they were making fun of a third filmmaker. They were just like, we saw him watching something on his phone. That's what they were making fun of. And I
Yeah.
was like, that's such an interesting observation. Like,
Hmm.
so people who are in the trade will have that perspective, and that is expected, I guess, because they put so much work into it. But
Yeah.
come from a layperson's perspective, if you see how many people would watch stuff on their phones when they're going home from work, how many people would watch it with a meal. Maybe people do it in the mess at Flame. Actually, now
Hmm.
there's COVID, who knows? But otherwise, people watching on their phones all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
growing in popularity. So how many people are questioning that anymore? Maybe yeah, standards are falling funnily.
Look, I don't know. See, I watch stuff on my phone all the time. I'm not really against the culture of watching stuff on the phone, and in fact, my laptop is my primary source of film watching, right? However, I think we mustn't let ourselves be carried away by like the dogma of having to watch things on a larger screen. If say you don't have access to one, or you just want to hang around at your house and just watch things on the laptop, it's fine. Maybe in the future they would make films to be watched on laptop screens or phone screens. Maybe films will be shot in such a manner so as to give you a good experience when watched on a smaller screen. Maybe, I don't know, claustrophobia or something like that. So I wouldn't completely disregard something like that, and I definitely disagree with the sentiment that films must be watched a certain way, but I do also think that there is a better way and a worse way.
I mean, again, better or worse becomes like a personal qualification.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
think
mean,
we're
better for
coming
me and
to
worse for me. Yeah.
yeah, totally. And that makes total sense. That we're discussing larger, if we're talking about larger cultures of correct ways of watching and incorrect ways of watching, not keeping personal opinions aside, like a high film
Yeah.
watching culture versus a low film watching culture. Yeah, so I think that's really interesting. For instance, if you were in a film class and they don't allow snacks there, or I would remember
Yeah, they don't.
fans would be like, there is no intermission, there are no snacks, you will sit till the end of the credits, which is what any Tamiz wala film student should do. So that's definitely true, that give credit where it's due and be respectful when you're watching something, versus how it happens in the real world, where people are itching to go get those popcorn, somebody will be munching loudly beside you, and that is their way of watching it. So
Yeah.
it becomes like a judgment on uh, on how, who does film watching correctly. I find that
Yeah.
really interesting. I wonder where I fall on the spectrum. Like I've gone away from how a proper film student should be doing stuff, so I'm not watching so
Yeah.
many good films. I haven't subscribed to Mubi yet. It keeps advertising being, please.
Oh no.
Oh, am I missing
That's
out?
oh, you're missing out so much. But
Yeah,
unfortunately, I think Mobi has lost its like free subscription for students kind of thing. I mean,
yeah.
they used to have that, but I think they've closed that now, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because of my current laziness, I feel like I'm ending up on the other side of the spectrum, and we can have a debate from two sides of it, which is I think
Yeah.
very interesting. So it's coming down to say how interested you are in watching a film in a certain way, and are you open to keeping other experiences there? Like, would somebody who
Yeah,
loves
absolutely.
watching film like that, would they go to a single screen and be grossed out, or would they be like, wow, this is also how film culture exists in India? I think it's interesting to keep your mind open to those things.
Yeah. But I think as a um I think it would be more the latter, because somebody who is, say, appreciative of film culture in general would not be as reserved about how they watch a film, and they would be more open to watching a film the way that particular section of society watches it, and engage themselves in the culture of that particular, um, say, world, right? And another thing that I wanted to say is that it's funny because people who, say, typical film students who are told to watch films a certain way without intermissions and snacks and things like that, they aren't representative of the larger population, like you said. But then we would also not say that people who watch films in the second way with breaks and looking forward to their popcorn and whatnot, they aren't watching a film right, because there have been film analysts and film critics and people who really study cinema, in detail, who watch it that way, and we wouldn't really belittle their achievements because they watch it in a way that we don't agree with.
Definitely. Yeah. So more questions we're raising are about like um, ownership of how a film is shown, and like, can someone demand of Christopher Nolan, please put it on the platform because we don't mind, versus Christopher Nolan saying, no, no, I'll put it up in a theater. I mean, of course, he doesn't have to
Yeah.
do it. People tell him.
Yeah, I mean, then again, it's his
But
work, so
yeah,
it's
yeah,
up
but
to
the
him.
fact that people feel an ownership over his film because it's now a legacy of his own. So I found that the fact that
Yeah,
people do that, I found that very interesting. Another thing this reminds me of
it
is
is. It is. Yeah.
we were working on an interview recently with a film scholar from Delhi University with my organization, and I edit videos out of those interviews. So one of the topics was, what did this do to the film poster? So how did we see that change? And it was very interesting. They said that when cinema started out in India, maybe when it grew in popularity was the 1950s and 60s. And so then a poster was very important for promotion. You'd put it up literally everywhere. You'd put it up in the cities, and of course outside the theater itself, and on auto rickshaws and in kirana ki dukan, and everywhere you'd use that as a promotion. And they say now that's become less and less important uh, to promote a film. Now the professor spoke about something called a motion poster, which I hadn't heard the term before, so I had to Google it. But it's so interesting, in which it's like a poster. It's something that moves on your phone, and it is geared towards people who have access to social media, who have access to the internet. So you'll probably see it on your Instagram, which will take you to Amazon Prime. End of story. So you don't need to see a poster out in physical space. So how we are
Yeah.
using marketing of films also to talk to a certain audience who's already online, like already connected. And I find that interesting that those films, like the professor put it, those films are talking to a moneyed audience. They don't need that mass audience anymore. They need the moneyed audience now that we're watching films more and more online. So it changes more than just the filmmaking. It changes the stuff that comes after. That's very interesting in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that is very contingent on the type of film and the whether it's a single screen or a multiplex. So because I mean, there's a single screen right next to my house, and I see posters on there all the time. New Kannada films. I mean, I live in Bangalore, so new Kannada films that come out, there's always a poster there. So I think physical, like paper posters,
Hmm.
won't really die out as long as single screen culture
Exists.
persists,
Hmm.
because it caters to a completely different audience
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
who
Yeah.
say don't have access to like the internet or social media, or are just not interested in such things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. So, how is it changed, for example, right now when a film festival is going to happen? Do you think that this has helped the dependence on internet film watching? That is what has enabled a film festival like First Cut to take place online now, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what?
In It doesn't really have much to do with the single screen multiplex thing, but the shift from watching it in person on a screen to watching it online. uh, and I want to tie this back to what we've been doing in the Film Society at Flame also. Like Film Society and First Cut kind of work. A lot of people who work for the Film Society work in First Cut as well. So we've seen the numbers go down. People don't want to watch stuff online. Like they don't want to sit in front of their computers all day for classes and then also come and watch a film at the end of the day and then talk about it. They prefer going to a room with other people and watching it on a screen. And I think First Cut has also been impacted by that. Um, because and this is just an hypothesis, I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that the numbers will go down for First Cut this year, which is unfortunate. Obviously it's not ideal for us, but the larger observation that we can make here is that film culture, film viewing culture cannot survive entirely online. It's impossible, because there is something intrinsic. There's an essence to watching a film on a large screen, maybe not on a large screen, but on a screen that's with other people, like as a community rather than alone, that cannot be taken away from it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about that being an important part of film viewing, that you do it with other people, you do it together, so you're in an experience together, and at the end you could be bickering with your friend about, okay, whether you liked it or you didn't, you overhear what other people are talking about it, or you say nothing at all, but the fact that you went into that experience together, I think that's really important. And I was just seeing an ad for, say, the Mumbai Film Festival, which will happen in February, and I'm in two minds about whether I would spend money to watch something online, and would that equate to the same thing? I mean, you would do it if you're interested in just the films, but there is something that you're losing out. And yeah, we're itching for that to pick back up again, I guess, right? That we're on the same page about that, I
Yeah.
hope.
With that said, though, with that said, I find it a little difficult to believe that that's been surviving for so long. Because personally, I'm not like a community film watcher. I don't really like watching films with other people, except if it's, I because in a room I find that there is always some disturbance. Like there'll be maybe people talking, whispering, having a snack. There'll be the sound of the like a packet of chips like crunching or whatever, and that puts me off a lot. So I that generally like to watch films alone, but I mean, unless it's like you said, like a trashy, sappy sort of film that calls for a larger, um, more communal film viewing experience. But
Hmm.
other than that, I'm more of a solitary watcher, right? So it
But
just surprises me that community watching has survived for so long. But I also see why it survived for so long, because obviously a film is made to be. I mean, if you're sitting in a on a if you're sitting in a large hall in front of a large screen, then you're going to start feeling overwhelmed at some point by the sheer scale and size of things. So I think the community also provides a sense of comfort and just togetherness, that you're going through this together rather than alone.
yeah,
I mean, that's not to say that the film is like hard to go through or something, but I'm saying it's just a point of like, it's an anchor to just ground you there and just keep you connected.
for sure. And I think it also, I mean, this also reflects on why you go see a certain film, or why a certain film becomes a hit, because so many other people have seen it. So somebody will say, oh,
Yeah,
you didn't see Dangal, we went and saw it. Or like, something is more exciting to you when it's a house full, when everybody's in there, and it's a sign of popularity. It's also a sign of say heard mentality, and it'll be like, okay, so what is
yeah,
so special about it? Versus something like, what, even if it's a brilliant film, but if I'm the only one watching in the theater, I will feel like, okay, was this a dampener? I mean, you wouldn't probably. Now I know how you like watching films, but I'm just, I think it's an interesting, like, you are very much influenced by other people, and
yeah, yeah, definitely.
you aren't,
I
Shrish.
mean, we do before we watch a film. I mean, a lot of us do go online to read up about it and
Mhm.
look at what people have said about it, because, and especially this holds true if you're going to watch it at the cinema, because you're paying for it. So you want to know what you're paying for and whether that's going to be worth your time.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So I guess if we were to answer all the questions that we raised in this discussion, uh, um, I would say that, like, we've come to a conclusion. I feel naturally to say
Yeah.
that to say that there is something special about watching films with other people, and if we cut out one culture of that and favor the other, whichever one it may be the single screen multiplex, then we are losing out on something within that
Yep.
culture.
Yep. So
And
I
so,
think, but you know what? The the trickiest question, I think, and just to sort of wrap wrap up my thoughts on this, is I wonder if providing more funding or more subsidies or whatever to a single screen theater, as in making the experience in a single screen theater either more comfortable, I wouldn't say more affordable, it's already really affordable, more comfortable, or making the multiplex experience more affordable. I wonder if that itself would take away from what single screens essentially are right now. For example, if they are made more uh, more like multiplexes in that they become, see, because with funding comes more comfort, because they're able to afford better seats and better whatever, right? Um, I don't know if that would change how single screens operate, or if that would change the foundation or the essence of what single screen viewing culture is.
Yeah, I think it's a very thin line that you don't want to become.
It is a very, yeah,
Yeah. So how do you hold on to the cultural
yeah,
thing of saying we've existed for decades and we want to hold that feel? So it's intangible. We can't really describe what that is. It's not
exactly, yeah,
just the chairs. It's not just the speakers. It's the environment in general. So yeah,
yeah,
it's an interesting question to all the film theater owners out there. I don't know how many how many have tuned into this. Probably not many, but it's an interesting question for them to maintain that in the future. And it's an interesting thing I read as well about somebody who's young who owns a film theater versus somebody who's been doing it for decades. So how much are you willing to move with the times, and what do you recognize as the aesthetic or environment of that place?
yep,
So yeah, definitely a very thin line, but an interesting thing to wait for in the future, I would say.
yep. On that note, though, I think that's about all I have to say today. What about you?
Yeah, likewise. I feel like after a point it becomes rambly. So here we are
Yeah,
having very many questions, having tried to answer some of them. And it was a great discussion. I think it's gotten my mind
yep,
busy.
yep,
So thank you. I think this is
yeah,
really
yeah. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been great to have you. It's always nice to see ex-Flame students
fun.
back.
And LCS, yes.
I mean, not that I've interacted with a lot of them, but I'm just,
All right. Thank you. Thank
anyway, yeah, and thank you all for listening to the Beanbag Archives once again. Um, and we will see you next week or in the next episode, whenever the next one is. Yeah. So thank you for listening. Bye bye.